What's going on, CGs? I'm your host, Perry Lloyd, and this is episode 60 of The Creation Grounds. That's incredible. If you've been rocking with me this long, I appreciate you, and if you're just joining, welcome. Before I get into this next interesting, intriguing, marvelous, magnificent guest, I want to encourage you, yes, you, to like, share, subscribe, tell people about the podcast that you think will get entertainment value from it, learn something from it, and just get some great inspiration, motivation, and all of that. This episode is kind of interesting to me because this is a family member, and through this family member, I discovered something very interesting about someone in my family that I did not know about. Now, this family member happens to be doing artistic things, so I thought it would be a great opportunity to have him onto the podcast and kind of preserve this history of my great-great-grandfather, who I just found out is a World War I hero, which is crazy. He has the Purple Heart. So I did not know this, and in this episode, Perry James comes on to talk about his grandfather, my great-great-grandfather, which he is adapting into a historical novel, which he has ambitions to eventually turn into a movie. He's been doing presentations, all these different things. So in this episode, he talks about just the lineage of 4 infantries within World War I, of colored, segregated infantries, and what they had to go through, and just kind of educating younger people who may not know about this kind of history and just the contributions that men like this have made to the country and democracy. So in this episode, we dive into that, and just his process of creating that and doing the research and all of that. Enjoy this episode with my family member, Perry James. Welcome to another episode of The Creation Grounds. I have Perry James, who I recently discovered is actually family, and discovered some interesting things and just wanted to have him on to talk about it. So Perry James, how are you, sir?
I am wonderful, Aaron, and I am so grateful that we have this opportunity to talk about someone who's near and dear to my heart. And after you find out more about him, I think you'll be enthused as well.
For sure. And what is your, before we talk about who that person is, who I'm really fascinated by, what is your favorite military film?
That would be Glory.
I love that. That single Denzel Washington tear gets you every time.
Absolutely. And it so much mirrors what happened to the men the African American men in World War I. It just parallels the story quite a bit.
Yeah. And tell me about a defining moment in your youth. Where'd you grow up and what kind of defined you?
In my youth, I grew up in the rural part of South Carolina called Sumter County, actually, in the rural area. And one of the defining moments was when I won the half-mile race for the first time. Back then it was called the 880. Now it's better known as the 800 meters. And I think I actually still hold my high school record for that as well. And I really enjoyed it because it gave me an opportunity to perform as an individual, but yet still be a part of a team when they roll up our scores together at the end of the track meet. And I proved to myself that I could compete in something and win, and particularly when it's like a sink or swim type of situation, and it's based on my effort and energy that I put in. And it was just a very huge confidence booster in my life.
I love that. I'm not so familiar with track. Is that kind of like an endurance run or a sprint?
It's a little of both, actually. It's a half a mile 2 times around the track, and then it's 2 400 meters races all together at the same time, at the same heat. The 400 meter is the true sprint. That's the toughest race in track, because you're running around a quarter of a mile as fast as you can go for a quarter of a mile. And with the 800, it's two of those together, but you have to be strategic and not burn yourself out too well in the very beginning. You have to strategize as to how fast you're going to run your first leg. Make sure that you stay up on your opponent and save some energy to complete the race.
I love that, and that kind of parallels kind of this journey that you went through in discovering what would be my great grandfather, your father, or your grandfather, correct?
My grand, exactly, absolutely,
Uh,
absolutely.
there was a lot of before we kind of introduce who that is. Well, we can right now. His name is Perry Lloyd, right?
Yes,
And tell me the story about your initial interest in Perry Lloyd and how did that interest all come about, and then we can get into who that is.
sure enough, sure enough. Well, I'm Perry the fourth, and it's kind of ironic that I had uh, three brothers that were born before me, and my mom decided to save Perry name for me. And growing up in Sumter County, I would always hear these fascinating stories about Perry Lloyd, my grandfather, and so he was looming larger than life. However, he died 10 years before I was born, and I've always wanted to find out more about this larger than life guy. I mean, they gave him the nickname of Boss one time because he was not afraid of anybody. This is the information that had been passed down to me from the older generation who knew him personally. And so I really wanted to find out a little bit more about him, a lot more, all I could actually. And so I went to the grave where he's buried, and I started there with his military issued tombstone. And with the information that was on the tombstone, I was able to then launch my extensive research into him. And then once I found out more about him, then I dove deeper to find out more about the African American soldiers that he served with in World War One.
What was the biggest and most challenging part of your research process, and why, besides him being your family, what did you discover about him that is just phenomenal?
One of the things that I discovered that was really phenomenal is the fact that he was multi-dimensional, and his level of confidence and bravado, family man, military man, was just really impressive to me. And so I just kept, diving in. And I told my mom after I went to the grave site, I said, well, found out about he participating in World War One, and he participated with the 371st Colored Infantry Regiment, and started digging into it and did some research at the county library to find out that he was actually wounded in battle. And so that piqued my interest, and I started researching it from that perspective. And I told my mother, I said, well, Mom, I found out that Granddaddy was wounded. And she said, yes, I do remember him being wounded about the head. I don't remember the particulars, but I remember him being wounded about the head, and I remember him sometimes speaking French. And son, I want you to get me his Purple Heart. And if you know my mother, Elise Lloyd James, which is his last living child, when you make a promise to Elise, you want to follow through with that.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, Mom, not only will I get his Purple Heart for you, I will be in France on the hill, or in the area, actually, because I didn't know at the time exactly where it was. But I said, I will be in France, wherever he was wounded, on the day that he was wounded, which would be September the 29th, 1918.
Wow. In the process of getting this Purple Heart, what was that like? Because I understand it was very arduous, and wasn't very easy.
Yes, thank you for bringing me back around to that because it was not easy. Sometimes uh, the military, just in our system of government, will make you prove beyond a shadow of a doubt, sometimes to a detriment, because you know that you're confident that what you're seeking is accurate. And so the initial thing that I did was I said I'm going to contact my state senator's office immediately and cut to the chase, because I knew I was going to need help. And fortunately, Senator Tim Scott's office provided me with the initial assistance that I was seeking in getting the Purple Heart for Perry Lloyd, Sergeant Perry Lloyd. And so we, with their help, petitioned the Department of the Army. They turned us down. And I'm saying, folks, I sent you a picture of his military issued tombstone. I don't think that you would issue a tombstone to someone who had less than honorable discharge. And after I proved that, there were a couple other hurdles that they threw up against us. But my background is sales, management, and I know from that experience, when someone tells you no, that means that they don't have enough information to tell you yes. And so I gave them additional information, and this happened about 3 times. And finally, I'm at Mom's house one day and got the email, and it says, "Your grandfather has been awarded the Purple Heart."
Wow.
Mom and I were jumping around like you thought we won the Mega Millions. We were ecstatic, and not only that, he was awarded the United States award for participating in the World War I. That was an additional medal, and one of the most prominent medals that he received, in fact, his entire regiment received, was the Croix de Guerre medal, and that was the French medal, the highest medal for bravery and assertiveness and ability to fight in a wartime situation. It was their highest medal. And that was impressive.
That is that's I was about to ask what makes you most proud about this story, but that's all those kind of accomplishments and achievements, and I'm just proud that somebody like that is in my family line. So I'm glad to connect and learn more about him.
Absolutely, and one of the most impressive things that I am impressed about is the fact that the regiment that he belonged to was the 371st Colored Infantry Regiment. They were the only infantry regiment out of 4 regiments that were segregated African American who were trained for combat in World War I, the first ones. And they were the only regiment that consisted of drafted men, primarily from South Carolina. And so there was a tremendous variance of men who showed up. You had preachers, teachers, cotton pickers, you had sharecroppers. My grandfather was working in a sawmill when he got drafted. And 4 months after he got drafted, he was promoted to sergeant.
Wow.
And that's pretty impressive. Normally it takes, quite a bit of time, and the criteria for getting advanced so quickly is that you have to show a certain level of intelligence, a certain level of physical abilities, and a certain level of leadership. And out of the 3,300 men, African American men in the 371st, he was chosen to be advanced to sergeant in 4 months.
It's incredible.
And that brings me back to one additional thing. I believe with all my heart, after doing all this research, that if he had the opportunity, that he could have been one great officer. But of course, African American men, particularly in the South, were not allowed to be an officer in the military at that time. During that era of World War I, they were not allowing African American men to fight in combat in World War I. And so there was a petition by some of the notable leaders of that time, and I feel that this is the actual beginning of the civil rights movement. Notables like W.E.B. Du Bois and others actually petitioned the Department of the Army and told them that we need our African American men to fight in this war, because they felt that through battle, through war, heroes are born. Additionally, they felt that we want to show that we are dedicated to the democracy of the United States, even though those men who wore the uniform could not wear the uniform, when they wore the uniform overseas, they could not wear the uniform back home for fear of being lynched or killed. But so the Department of the Army relented and says, okay, well, we will give you 4 African American regiments of men, African American men, and train them in combat infantry to participate in the war. So it was a big experiment. Everyone, most people except the African American community, wanted these men to fail. They had 4 regiments, all total, the 369th Infantry Regiment out of Harlem, New York. You may hear more about them.
Mm-hmm.
And they actually introduced jazz to Europe. A gentleman by the name of Lieutenant James Reese Europe was the band leader, and he was part of the 369th Infantry Regiment, who went to France and started playing jazz music for the French. And then there was the 370th Infantry Colored Regiment out of Chicago, Illinois. And then the 371st, our regiment, out of South Carolina. And then the 372nd out of the Mid-Atlantic states, Maryland, Delaware, and those states that make up the Mid-Atlantic. And so these regiments were real experimental regiments, and a lot of people at the establishment wanted these men to fail. And things were put into place that would promote their idea of having these African American men to fail.
What makes this an important story to tell and preserve, in your opinion?
We're in a pretty tumultuous time, and with a lot of anger and a lot of misunderstanding of people of different heritage and background here in the United States. And I do believe that if people are more aware of the contributions that were made by African American men in World War I, they may have a better understanding of and appreciation of the contributions that these men made under terrible circumstances the contributions that they made to defeating Germany in World War One. Additionally, you know, fortunately, I had a good relationship with my father growing up. But there may be some little young black kid who's looking for a hero. And if they got the information about my grandfather and the other World War One African American soldiers, then they may walk a little taller, hold their head up a little higher, and be a little bit prouder of their heritage and believe that through it all, they can be successful and follow their dream.
I love that. And you're kind of creating that now with a historical novel. Where did that idea come? Where it became research, you got the Purple Heart for 'em, and you said, now I want to preserve this and kind of create a historical novel. What was that process like for you?
Well, fortunately, I've always wanted to write a novel. Many years ago, even before I knew anything about, or before I completed the research. Well, the research is not complete, actually. Before I got all the information about Sergeant Perry Lloyd and the other men who fought in World War One. And so gathering all of that information, I thought and I felt and I feel that I have to share this with other people. I think that there's a lot to be learned from it. And the book that I'm writing is an historical novel, whereas the historical part of my writing tells you about what happened during this particular time in our history and where it happened and what were the conditions. The novel designation actually puts you in that situation as you are reading it. You can feel the intensity of battle. You can feel the bigotry that these men faced. You could feel the leadership that Sergeant Perry Lloyd displayed to be promoted to sergeant in such a short period of time. And so I'm so happy that these things, my desire to write, plus the knowledge of this 371st Infantry Regiment, was the perfect fit for me.
And when do you think this is going to be released? I know you said you're in the final edits. Do you guys have a release date yet?
We hope to release it by December the 15th.
Okay, so soon.
Yeah, there's a big possibility that we could release it around Thanksgiving, but I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. But one of the things that I tell people when I talk about the book is, particularly at Christmas time, what a great gift to give your family, the gift of knowledge, the gift of heritage. So it's a legacy piece. And I do believe that this will be a book that's worthy of being on the coffee table for people to see when they come visit your home.
I love it. It's awesome, and it's being released on Amazon. Do you know how? Can you speak about where it's gonna? Is it gonna be in Barnes and Noble? Like, what are your plans there?
My plans is to have the book distributed with reputable companies, organizations. You're just not in the game if you're not on Amazon. So of course it'll be on Amazon, and it will be available in first editions. And haven't really worked it out yet, but I for people such as yourself and other family members and friends. I want to be able to autograph the book. So that part I got to figure out. However, it will be ready by December 15th.
Yeah, man, I'm looking forward to it, and when this thing is a movie, I pray that I'm in it, being an actor.
I
So
got you, my brother.
yeah,
You know, we will definitely. You will have first dibs on a major part.
I
I
love it.
promise you. I promise you that. I'll make sure that that happens. I'll write that into the contract.
Please, please do. I love it. And what book have you gifted the most in the past year?
But say again.
What book have you gifted the most in the past year?
Um. Oh, the book that I gifted was Sully, and um, that's by John Grisham, and I gave it to my sons and my grandson in hopes of encouraging them to read more. And I chose that book because they all are graduates, and my grandson is attending North Carolina A&T State University and an HBCU, historically black college or university. And all three of these men matriculated through it, and one is still there, of course. And so I figured that they would be interested more in a story about a African American basketball player at an HBCU. And I try to motivate them to read a little bit more, because I think that what we don't do enough of is read. It really opens your perspective on life when you look at situations other people have been in. You learn a new word, you increase your vocabulary. It gives you more of a conversation piece when you're talking to someone. So I read a lot, and I gifted that book in hopes of getting them to read a little bit more themselves.
That's great. Yeah, I agree 100%. And we kind of spoke when we were talking on the phone when I first discovered Perry Lloyd, that this potentially in the future could be a good play. I know that you were doing a play around schools and portraying him, maybe bringing that to New York or whatever. But what are you working on now that people should look out for, and what do you desire to work on next if it's not in yet existence?
That's great question to ask, Aaron. I am in my final edits of the book that I'm writing. The book is going to be entitled Sergeant Rawhide, and that's the nickname that I came up with for Granddad for Sergeant Perry Lloyd, because Mom would tell me about how he would make rawhide whips by hand, and how sometimes at the stillness of the evening or early in the mornings on the weekend, she could hear the whip crackle around in the yard. And so I have conditioned myself to hear that same sound of that rawhide whip being cracked by Granddad. And additionally, he would break wild horses and mules for the people in Sumter County. And they would say that he was the best of the best in Sumter County. And he had this chestnut colored horse that was a really large horse for that era. And he also had a beautiful saddle that has all the studs and things in the saddle. It was just adorable saddle. And so with the nickname of Rawhide, Sergeant Rawhide, that will be the title of the book. And I believe it's And I'm not saying it just because I wrote it, but the story is phenomenal. And it takes you through not only his military career, but leading up to the military career. What foundation did this man have that gave him the confidence and the courage to become a sergeant in the Army? Because some people at that era, they didn't know what was going on. They didn't have any experience and not any exposure to military growing in rural South Carolina. But yet still, he had a foundation that gave him insight into what he could do, and it was a smart move. I mean, because sergeants actually make more money, so he wanted to save money and buy his own 40 acres when he got out, and so that motivated him, I do believe, to get promoted in rank. Now, what I do is I give presentations to fraternal organizations, to associations, to schools, to military locations, and I give presentations. I dress up in a replica uniform that my grandfather would wear, and with his medals, with his sergeant stripes, and with other stripes that are on his military jacket. I dress up in the uniform, and I have some artifacts from World War I, and I give these presentations. And the very first presentation that I gave was about 2 years ago, and it was to the Daughters of the American Revolution.
Wow.
Yeah, believe it or not. And so I was new at this. This is my first one. It was raining like crazy, and it was a 2-hour drive. I was all nervous. I was praying, and when I got there, the reception was great. And even with all the rain, the ladies came out, and after my presentation, I got a standing ovation. And they, some of the younger members came to me and said, "Mr. James, you have to write a book." And I'm like, yeah, I can do that. And this is Mr. James. That book will then turn into a movie. And if I do it right, and if I put legitimate effort into it, then hopefully it will be a movie. I believe that it will one day. A screenplay is definitely something that will work. So there's just so many avenues that Sergeant Rawhide could move in and effectuate pride in the people who are reading it and who share the heritage with this man. And not only folks who share the direct heritage, from a entertainment standpoint, the book is funny. There's several scenes in it that you're just going to crack up laughing, and it's tear jerking at times. It makes you angry at times, but there's a love story in it as well.
Okay.
So this story is just not about Sergeant Perry Rawhide Lloyd. It's about those approximately 15,000 men from the 4 African American regiments that made up the 93rd Division. It's broad. It's about these men as well, and they deserve a high amount of praise, because at the end of the war, there was this big battle called the Meuse-Argonne Offensive. And so if you were to imagine a line from Washington, D.C. down to Florida, all moving at the same time, going to the east, to push the Germans out of France once and for all and end this war. Well, the 371st was part of that, and they were moving so fast in that line until the order was given for them to slow down, so the left flank, the French on the left, and the Senegalese soldiers on the right could catch up to these African American men. And there's a phrase for what they did, and the phrase is apex of the attacking salient.
Wow.
You'll see that on the front page of my historical novel.
I love it. Cool. And I ask all my guests this. When you think of the word creative, who comes to mind for you and why?
When I hear the word creative, it's something new. Actually, I think of my mother because she came from a humble beginning, and she had, I think 8 brothers and sisters from South Carolina, and everyone except her migrated to the north in search of better opportunity, work, and getting away from the vestiges of the Jim Crow South.
Mm-hmm.
But she stayed because she married my father, and they started having children. And she had to be creative because of the meager existence that we had. I mean, they were scrapping people. My dad was sharecropper for a while, and she had dreams and ambitions of becoming a teacher, and she made those things happen. And she was creative from the standpoint of figuring out, with my father's help, how they're going to feed and educate and love these children that they have. And so she is now the matriarch of the entire community that we're from. And all of my sisters and brothers, there are 5 additional ones, have friends who come by and visit when they come home from out of town. She is a phenomenal person.
Wow.
So I think of Elise Lloyd James.
I love it. And God willing, this thing will be a movie and a bestseller and all that kind of stuff. How can people connect with you if there's any producers, screenwriters, anybody that just wants to hear more about this? How do people connect with you?
They can easily call me at my cell number is 803-351-8111, or they can reach me on my personal email, which is Pejaz, spelled PEJAS 7547 at gmail.com. Additionally, they can go to my website, which is SGT Rawhide, RAWHIDE.net.
I love it.
And you can reach me that way.
Well, it's been a pleasure, man.
Yeah, and Aaron, thank you so much. I really appreciate you feeling that this is a subject that's worthy enough for your podcast. And I wish you success in all of your endeavors. And I'm impressed with you. And I think good things are in your path.
Thank you.